The legacy of European colonization. The legacy of European colonization in the Americas is complex and multifaceted, encompassing both enduring challenges and opportunities for indigenous peoples and societies across the region. One of the most enduring legacies of European colonization is the ongoing struggle for indigenous rights, land rights, and self-determination in the face of ongoing colonization, exploitation, and marginalization. Despite centuries of resistance and resilience, indigenous peoples in the Americas continue to face significant challenges in asserting their rights to land, resources, and cultural autonomy in the face of ongoing threats from extractive industries, government policies, and social discrimination. The legacy of European colonization is also evident in the enduring disparities in health, education, and socioeconomic status between indigenous and non-indigenous populations in the Americas. Indigenous communities continue to experience higher rates of poverty, unemployment, and social marginalization compared to non-indigenous populations, reflecting centuries of dispossession, discrimination, and exclusion from mainstream society. Moreover, the legacy of European colonization is reflected in the ongoing impacts of environmental degradation, resource extraction, and climate change on indigenous lands and territories. Indigenous communities across the Americas continue to confront threats to their lands, waters, and livelihoods from mining, logging, agriculture, and other extractive industries that have devastated ecosystems, displaced communities, and undermined indigenous ways of life. Despite these challenges, the legacy of European colonization also includes opportunities for indigenous peoples to reclaim, revitalize, and celebrate their cultural heritage, languages, and traditions. Indigenous communities across the Americas have mobilized to assert their rights to self-determination, cultural autonomy, and territorial sovereignty, advocating for the recognition of indigenous land rights, the preservation of indigenous languages, and the promotion of indigenous cultural revitalization initiatives. Furthermore, the legacy of European colonization has fostered opportunities for dialogue, reconciliation, and collaboration between indigenous and non-indigenous peoples in the Americas. Indigenous movements for social justice, human rights, and environmental protection have gained increasing recognition and support from allies within mainstream society, leading to greater awareness and solidarity around indigenous issues and concerns. In conclusion, the legacy of European colonization in the Americas is complex and multifaceted, encompassing both enduring challenges and opportunities for indigenous peoples and societies across the region. While the legacy of colonization includes ongoing struggles for indigenous rights, land rights, and socioeconomic equality, it also includes opportunities for indigenous peoples to reclaim, revitalize, and celebrate their cultural heritage, languages, and traditions. The ongoing journey towards reconciliation, justice, and empowerment for indigenous peoples in the Americas is a testament to the resilience, strength, and determination of indigenous communities to overcome the legacies of colonization and build a future grounded in justice, equity, and respect for indigenous rights and sovereignty. The cultural revival and indigenous empowerment movement. In the wake of centuries of colonization and marginalization, indigenous peoples across the Americas have embarked on a journey of cultural revival and empowerment, reclaiming their heritage, languages, and traditions, and asserting their rights to self-determination, land, and resources. One of the most powerful expressions of indigenous empowerment is the cultural revival movement, which seeks to reclaim, revitalize, and celebrate indigenous languages, traditions, and knowledge systems that have been threatened by centuries of colonization and cultural suppression. Indigenous communities across the Americas have launched initiatives to preserve and promote their cultural heritage, including language immersion programs, cultural festivals, and community-based education initiatives that seek to transmit traditional knowledge and values to future generations. The cultural revival movement is also reflected in the resurgence of indigenous arts, literature, and music that draw on traditional forms and themes to create new expressions of indigenous identity and pride. Indigenous artists, writers, and musicians are reclaiming their voices and telling their own stories through a variety of mediums, challenging stereotypes and misconceptions about Indigenous peoples and cultures, and asserting their presence and contributions to mainstream society. In addition to cultural revival, Indigenous communities across the Americas are also mobilizing to assert their rights to self-determination, land, and resources, advocating for the recognition of Indigenous land rights, the protection of sacred sites, and the preservation of traditional territories and ecosystems. Indigenous-led movements for environmental justice, land sovereignty, and Indigenous rights have gained increasing visibility and support from allies within mainstream society, leading to greater awareness and solidarity around Indigenous issues and concerns. One of the most powerful expressions of Indigenous empowerment is the resurgence of Indigenous governance and leadership, as Indigenous communities reclaim their traditional systems of governance and decision-making and assert their rights to self-determination and sovereignty. Indigenous nations and communities across the Americas are asserting their right to govern themselves according to their own laws, customs, and traditions, challenging colonial and state-imposed systems of governance that have marginalized and disempowered Indigenous peoples for centuries. Moreover, Indigenous peoples are increasingly asserting their presence and agency in national and international forums, advocating for their rights and interests on the global stage. Indigenous leaders and activists are playing key roles in international movements for climate justice, human rights, and Indigenous rights, challenging colonial legacies and advocating for the rights and interests of Indigenous peoples in the face of ongoing threats from climate change, resource extraction, and environmental degradation. In conclusion, the cultural revival and Indigenous empowerment movement represents a powerful and transformative force for change in the Americas, as Indigenous peoples reclaim their heritage, languages, and traditions, assert their rights to self-determination and sovereignty, and mobilize to confront the ongoing legacies of colonization, marginalization, and exploitation. The resurgence of Indigenous culture, leadership, and activism is reshaping the cultural, social, and political landscape of the Americas, inspiring hope and empowerment for Indigenous peoples and communities across the region.